Well, aloha kako, ikomo mai. Welcome if you're tuning in for the first time. I'm Father Charles Browning. I'm the rector here at St. Mary's Episcopal Church in the always beautiful city of Honolulu, Hawaii. And we're here to talk a little bit about General Convention. Let me put a link in the chat box. If you're tuning in for the first time, we always begin with a little service of evening prayer. And so that link will take you to our online version of the Book of Common Prayer, where you'll just need to scroll down to where it says in the early evening. And so that's where we will be. If you have an actual printed copy of the Book of Common Prayer, according to use in the Episcopal Church, we will be on page 139. Page 139. So we got a few things to cover this evening, and so we will get right to it. I will go ahead and say that our readings for this evening are going to be, our reading for this evening is going to come from the appointed lessons for our saint of the day, a guy named Enmegabau, who was the first indigenous person ordained into the Episcopal Church. So I didn't want to, first indigenous, just to get it right. So he was ordained into the Episcopal Church. And so it is, and this is in the 1800s. He served as a missionary to his people. And I think he's not only is he a good saint for today, but also a pertinent figure to look at as we look at the future of our Episcopal Church. So with that, we'll get right into it. So as you're getting settled in, clicking over to the page that you need over there, or opening your prayer book, I just invite us to sit, to be still just for a moment, to let the concerns and occupations of our day to peel away from us, and to focus on our innermost being, our na'au, that place where the Lord dwells in us when we accept him and follow after him. We'll take 3 breaths, and then we will begin. Now join with me as we say together, O gracious light, pure brightness of the ever-living Father in heaven, O Jesus Christ, holy and blessed. Now as we come to the setting of the sun, and our eyes behold the vesper light, we sing your praises, O God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You are worthy at all times to be praised by happy voices, O Son of God, O giver of life, and to be glorified through all the worlds. Our reading for this evening comes from the Gospel according to St. Luke, the 6th chapter, beginning at the 17th verse. Jesus came down from the mountain with his disciples and stood on a large area of level ground. A great company of his disciples and a huge crowd of people from all around Judea and Jerusalem and the area around Tyre and Sidon joined him there. They came to hear him and to be healed from their diseases, and those bothered by unclean spirits were healed. The whole crowd wanted to touch him because power was going out from him and he was healing everyone. Jesus raised his eyes to his disciples and said, Happy are you who are poor, because God's kingdom is yours. Happy are you who hunger now, because you will be satisfied. Happy are you who weep now, because you will laugh. Happy are you when people hate you, reject you, insult you, and condemn your name as evil because of the human one. Rejoice when that happens. Leap for joy, because you have a great reward in heaven. Their ancestors did the same things to the prophets. Here ends the reading. As I said earlier, this is a passage given to us for the observance of En Megabau. But I think this passage is very pertinent to where we are in the Episcopal Church as we are preparing for this 81st General Convention, because for two reasons that jump out to me when I was looking over this passage earlier, is one, that we get the Luke version of the Beatitudes. We don't get the opposite of that, by the way. Jesus, if you read that passage later on, Luke chapter 6, Jesus, he gives the 5 or 6 whatever blessings or happies, as it is in the Common English Bible, but then he gives woes to people, which is an interesting counterpoint that we don't get from the Beatitudes in Matthew's Gospel, the more familiar version of them. But we get the Beatitudes. But if you notice in the Beatitudes, Jesus says, right, happy or blessed are you when you're sad. Happy or blessed are you when people revile you. Leap for joy when that happens. This is because, Jesus is effectively saying that you have entered into a space that confirms you're doing the right thing. The prophets of God were persecuted. So if you find yourself persecuted for the sake of following after Jesus, then you're doing the right thing, right? If everybody thinks highly of you and you fit neatly into people's little, political pukas or whatever, then you should be on guard. That's kind of effectively what Jesus is saying. I think for us Episcopalians, this is important because so often we chase acceptance. We chase broad appeal. We are a church that is contending with the fact that we are not in the upper echelons of respect in American culture, unlike where we might have been at one point in our history. And instead of lamenting that fact, maybe we look at the reality that this is a blessing, that now we are freed from the shackles of having to play nice with power. And now we can actually be free to preach the gospel as it really is, rather than a version of the gospel that plays nice with power or something to that effect. So there's freedom to be found in this. It's good news, perhaps. But the other main thing that jumps out to me is, and this to me is the thing we Episcopalians need to be reminded of constantly, and I think we are hearing it, and that is the people are coming out of the woodwork to find Jesus, because it's in Jesus that there's healing, that there's freedom from demons, that there's those sorts of things, that Jesus is the main thing. And, with the election of Michael Curry as presiding bishop, that was the result of a time where we in the Episcopal Church had felt that for a long time we had downplayed Jesus. What attracted people to Michael Curry was the fact that he was willing to talk about Jesus. And so we have gone through 9 years of being a church that's learned to get more comfortable with talking about Jesus. And now we need to take that to the next step of what it means to follow Jesus and not just talk about him. This is what we'll really spend some more time on in this little installment this evening. So this is the 1-2 punch of this passage for our present moment in the Episcopal Church, that people want to hear about Jesus, and that we can understand our current situation, whether we call it decline or whatever you want to call it, as itself a form of good news that frees us to be honest about ourselves and honest about the gospel that we have received, and that it perhaps opens us up to be better at proclaiming those things to a world that is desperate for Jesus as we have received him. So with that, now I invite us once again into a time of silence or stillness. And I invite us to make known our prayers and thanksgivings to God. Special intention for members of our community here at St. Mary's that need healing. For those who live on the streets around the church, for their comfort, their healing, their being made full. For all those suffering in war in various places around the world, both those that make the news headlines and those that don't. And then, of course, for our church as we prepare to gather in this pivotal moment in our history. And now, join with me as we say the prayer that our Lord Jesus taught us. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours now and forever. Amen. Since we use the lessons for In Megabau, let's say his collect to conclude. Almighty God, who led your pilgrim people of old by fire and cloud, grant that the ministers of your church, following the example of your servant in Megabau, may lead your people with fiery zeal and gentle humility, through Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Okay, let me switch gears here. You can switch with me. Grab a sip of tea. And let's get right to it. So, first, I want to apologize for the abrupt cancellation of this last week. Had a few things pop up that took prep time away from me. And I was sitting here in my office in the late afternoon last week, realizing I had not sent out a thumbnail or a link, hadn't put together anything, and realizing, what I wanted to touch on, I felt inadequately prepared. And I just could not in good conscience just come online and try to wing it and try to speak about things that I don't really know about, and risk giving bad information or what have you, or just to be unprepared. So I felt it was better for us to not gather than to gather with bad quality stuff. Not that what we're doing here is necessarily high quality. I mean, I got a pile of junk you can see right there, right? So now that I pointed out, you're never gonna not notice it until I clean it up. But I do have you can see I'm not mirrored, so that's why I keep getting the wrong arms here. But I do have a new Godzilla toy. You can look at that. Anyway, distractions. So I didn't want to put out something that was not, fully formed. So that's why we didn't gather this week, or last week. So this week, I did some more work. And I have to confess something else. And that is, I discovered that Scott Gunn, who is with the Forward Movement and who is a hallowed figure for us in the Episcopal Church, He has done the Lord's work every year for General Convention. And I am going to share a link because here's the thing. I don't like doing duplication of efforts. If somebody does something really well, I want to put that out there for you. And so the Reverend Scott Gunn, Walking Saint, has done the impressive task, or is still in the process of doing this impressive task of blogging his way through the resolutions of the church. So the General Convention that is coming up has something like 243 resolutions, might be a little bit more by now, but well over 200 resolutions to be considered. There is no way I would try to even begin to cover that in this discussion. I'm painting with a broad brush here and talking about a few things that I think are worth paying attention to. But that being said, Scott has done a phenomenal job, way better than anything I could do. And so if you are really interested in what is going on at General Convention, what's on the table, what's being voted on, Scott's your guy. That link to 7 Whole Days, which is his blog, is where he's gathered everything. You can read the text of resolutions if you want, but if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see something that he calls, what's the exact word he uses here? He calls it Resolution Palooza, blogging through the resolutions for General Convention 2024. And on there, from there below, is where you have each installment where he goes through every resolution. And it's readable. Sometimes it's funny. He gives his how he's planning to vote at the time of reviewing it, and so that's insightful. And so it's a wealth of information. I highly recommend it. It is not nearly as boring as you might think it would be. And again, it's a way better job than anything that I'm going to do here. So check that out. The other thing I have to admit to you all is that I initially said that I would do a whole thing around the president of the House of Deputies position, the way that I did the presiding bishop 2 weeks ago. Part of why I didn't do this last week is that I discovered that while there are really great, concise summaries of the history and development of the office of presiding bishop, I am not aware of anything to that effect that is easily accessible regarding the development of the House of the President, of the House of the President of the House, or the President of the House of Deputies, of how that role has evolved and developed. And so it's a lot more, again, there'd be a lot more research involved. So I'm going to talk about that tonight, but I'm also going to talk about some other big resolutions, and then to also address not only the literal direct version of the title of this, which is what are we doing, but also the kind of rhetorical what are we doing nature of this. So I know we're 18 minutes in and I'm now just getting started, but there you go. So here's a little, the Living Church has this great little article right here. I'm going to copy and put in the thing. I'm giving you lots of links for your own review later on. What? Get out of here. Sorry, I hit the wrong button and it wanted to shut me down. So the Living Church has this recent coverage of a interview that, or like a sort of debate moderation thing that was done of the 3 candidates who are running for the president of the House of Deputies. So 2 weeks ago, I talked about the president or the presiding bishop, and how when we developed the Episcopal Church, we were very much inspired by the great work of bicameral representative democracy taking place in the burgeoning United States of America. And so we sought to apply that kind of governance structure to this very ancient form of Christianity in what is a pretty remarkable experiment, to be quite frank. And so we have, just like we have the 2 houses of governance, right? That constitute our Congress. We have in the Episcopal Church two houses, the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies. The presiding bishop began primarily as the person who presided over the House of Bishops, or the bishop that presided over the House of Bishops, that then morphed into a sort of almost quasi archbishop role for the church. Likewise, we needed someone to preside over the House of Deputies. Now, the House of Deputies is the largest legislative body in the Episcopal Church. This is because it is made up of members of the clergy, priests and deacons, as well as lay people. Dioceses are allocated a number of delegates, and those delegates go. Our diocese has 4 delegates, 2 lay, 2 clergy. And so we have a lot of people that show up to the General Convention of the Episcopal Church as a result, since all of the dioceses have multiple people that make up this body. And because of just the sheer size of this, the president of the House of Deputies has taken on a position that is seen as second only in importance to that of the presiding bishop. And so there is, it is morphed beyond just being a procedural, bureaucratic, institutional role, but also being a legitimate leadership role in its own right. So the current president of the House of Deputies is a woman by the name of Julia Ayala Harris. She was elected 2 years ago at our last general convention, and she follows up Gay Clark Jennings, who was in the position for a very long, the Reverend Gay Clark Jennings, who is in that position for quite a while. Julia Ayala Harris brings a couple of historic things with her in her election. She is the first Latina to be elected to that position. She is also the first millennial to be elected to any kind of leadership position of the church of that tenor, right? I mean, there have been millennials on the presiding bishop staff and things like that, but she's the first to be at this kind of level of the church, and so that's a huge thing. We'll talk a little bit about Title IV, but because the Title IV disciplinary canons are part of the discussion at General Convention this year. And part of that is due to the fact that, unfortunately, Title IV disciplinary stuff had to be enacted as a result of Julia Ayala Harris experiencing what she calls unwanted physical contact from a retired bishop in the church. And that's a whole story you can look up on your own. That is complicated treading waters that I'm just going to avoid talking about. But that has unfortunately marred a little bit in recent months her time as the president of the House of Deputies. Now, I have mentioned in church a few times that this election has some drama to it, and that's not what I just mentioned is not what I'm referring to. When I talk about the drama of this election this year, is that one, it's not very common for someone who has been elected to be the president of the House of Deputies to have a challenge to their leadership so quickly, because we have 2 people now that are reaching for this job that are now running against her. One of which is the Reverend Rachel Tabor Hamilton, who is the vice president of the House of Deputies. So the person who was elected alongside her as the vice president, along Julia Ayala Harris. This is the result of some institutional issues that have come up. A little bit of that is hinted in the article that I linked just a moment ago in the chat box. But basically, the short of it is this: that Reverend Rachel Tabor Hamilton from the Diocese of Olympia. She's an Indigenous woman and has done, I think, Choctaw, but don't quote me on that. But she has done a lot of work within the Indigenous community and has made a major focus out of getting the Episcopal Church to acknowledge some of the horrific things that it did in the formation of indigenous schools. That has, especially, I mean, a lot of horrible things have come out of the Anglican Church in Canada around this topic. And so the Episcopal Church has also done things of a similar nature that need to be addressed. And so a committee was formed to do research and awareness raising and other things related to this topic that Reverend Rachel Tabor Hamilton felt was not being properly prioritized, other than announcing a committee. And so she has felt that within the institutional work of the office of the president of the House of Deputies, that things needed to be addressed more properly. They were not being addressed in a way that she felt was satisfactory. And so she has now thrown her hat into the ring to run for this position. If you read that same article that I just linked, you will find that there was a woman by the name of Zena Link, who is also running for the role of president of the House of Deputies. And apparently she was brought in to do some mediation work regarding the culture of the office of the president of the House of Deputies. And after that process is determined that she would like to throw her hat into the ring as well. And so it's a very interesting election for those who want to watch these sorts of things. And the link that I sent with you mentioned that there wasn't a whole lot of drama that came out of their debate meeting that was moderated by Ian Markham, the Dean of Virginia Seminary. I think a few people were expecting some of that. Luckily, blessedly, everyone's been very cordial in all of this. And so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Now, a fun little wrinkle to this is that in order to provide some balance in this role and in the leadership of the House of Deputies, whoever is elected to be the president of the House of Deputies, if they are ordained, then the vice president has to be a layperson. Conversely, if the president of the House of Deputies is a layperson, then the vice president has to be ordained. That way, there's not an imbalance in the office of running the House. So we have two lay women that are now running, right? One is the incumbent, one is a challenger. The other challenger is a priest, again, out of the Diocese of Olympia. And that person is also currently the vice president of the House of Deputies. So now what this does is that it opens up a possibility for an election for the vice president of the House of Deputies. But that election is only contingent on the outcome, or largely contingent on the outcome of the election for the president of the House of Deputies. So that's another fun thing to watch. And I'm keeping an eye on it because my friend Charles Graves IV is one of the people kind of in the wings waiting to run for the vice president, depending on how all this stuff plays out. And I got to say, Charles is a young priest. He's from Baltimore area originally, if I remember correctly, and is somebody to keep an eye on in the church. Just put that out there for you. So this is going to be an interesting thing to watch just from the bureaucratic procedural standpoint. In terms of how this is going to affect the day-to-day life of us in the Episcopal Church, I don't honestly know what the immediate impacts will be with that position and how it could change. I do imagine that this question around the issues of indigenous peoples and the Episcopal Church will definitely come more to the fore as a result, one way or another, because it has been such a big deal, and rightly so. How that will affect us Episcopalians in Hawaii is an interesting conversation, because, as I'm quick to remind everyone, we began life as the Hawaiian Reformed Catholic Church, and then were annexed into the Episcopal Church. And so when the indigenous schools and things that were developing, and the things that were taking place over on the continental United States, when all of that stuff was happening, that we're dealing with the fallout of it largely now, we were a different church entirely. And on top of that, we were a church founded by indigenous people because we were, right, King Kamehameha IV and Queen Emma were the ones who invited the Queen of England to bring clergy here and to establish it as a national church. So that's not to say there's not stuff to talk about, because after annexation, obviously there were some problems that came about. And so, but our conversation around this topic is going to be of a much different tenor. And so that'll be an interesting thing to see how it plays out. So that's just sort of the broad strokes of what's going on with the election of the president of the House of Deputies. There's a lot more news and information out there if you want to follow all of that. And again, I highly recommend that you do, just to know what's going on with our church. I mentioned Title IV. Title IV is the other big thing that's happening at General Convention. Title IV, again, is our disciplinary canons in the church. A big change happened with the disciplinary canons at the General Convention in, I believe it was 2009. The Title IV canons that we currently have in the church came about at that convention. Our own bishop was heavily involved in the development of those. And if I recall the way that Bob has talked about this, our Bishop Bob has talked about this, is that it was a move away from sort of the military tribunal model, which had been the way it had been done in the past, and trying to make things a little bit more pastoral, but also trying to make things more transparent. And it came about in a time where we saw all of the stuff coming out of the Roman Catholic Church, the beginnings of things related to sexual abuse coming out of the Baptist Church. And so we were definitely signaling to the wider world that we are a church that takes clergy discipline seriously, that takes abuse allegations in the church seriously. And so we put that front and center and again, laid this out. However, this was before the advent of the movement that happened starting 4 or 5 years ago that we call the Me Too movement, which was calling various men in various positions of power to task over their treatment of women and over the ways in which women had been abused and exploited in various industries, most notably Hollywood and the music industry. And there just being a strong reckoning. I mean, this is the movement that revealed the horrors of what Harvey Weinstein was doing, that revealed the horrors of what Epstein was doing. That brought out just look at the news, right? P. Diddy, right? Sean Combs is now being exposed for things that he has done as a result of this movement. We in the church were not prepared for this. And that's kind of what's happening now, is there's a realization that when we structured our Title IV stuff, we did it in a way that was not as attentive to some other things that we could have done. It was not a perfect process. It'll never be a truly perfect process. But it is definitely time for us to amend and address our disciplinary canons. For one thing, more transparency is desired. There is also a desire to make sure that that the result of investigations and all of that results in proper proportionate reactions, things like that. At the same time, however, I think we have to be cautious around not going too far to being like a corporate HR department. And one thing that we've also not done, and that we're not doing enough to pay attention to, is the way in which it is easy for the Title IV process to be weaponized by bad actors. There is a story out there now, the Living Church has covered it, of a number of conservative-leaning priests out of the dioceses in New York and other places that managed to be targeted for their theological positions utilizing elements from Title IV. And it's a truly horrific story. I don't know how common this sort of thing is, but it's definitely evidence that it's something that can happen if we don't pay attention to it. And so I think that's also something that awareness needs to be raised around, because we should not be weaponizing these processes that are necessary for us to address the bad behavior of sinners in our church, and the real monstrous things that can happen to people. As many of you know, I have second to first-hand experience with people who have been abused in the church. And so this is something I take very seriously. And so when people weaponize a process for their own ends rather than letting it be what it exists for, it runs the risk of ruining it for everyone and tainting the waters for when people actually need these things. And so, but anyway, so that's a bit of the conversation that's happening around Title IV, to increase transparency, but also to make things a little more, tight. While also, I think we have to be cautious again, not to become too overly bureaucratic in this stuff. Just we'll get to in a moment, because one of the other things that's happened with our General Convention are changes that have been brought up in the rules of order and how business is conducted of the church. So, little history lesson. General Convention used to be about near 3 weeks long. It's been shortened to 2 weeks in more recent history. And then, because of COVID, it went down to 1 week. And this is proven challenging for us, but also a blessing. Because given the limitations that needed to happen as a result of COVID, it sort of forced us into a place of being able to streamline certain things of the legislative process of our church. We were able to move. So there's lots of resolutions that are proposed that probably don't require a ton of debate. They're granular, they're procedural, they're the sorts of things that can be done in committee work, and then can be moved to a consent calendar, because a lot of the people who work in the committees also do delegation work, and so therefore the debate and discussion has already been done. It's not something that feels it needs to be brought to the floor for everyone to weigh in on, because that just becomes tedious. And so there has been a push to move more things to a consent calendar, which means resolutions are voted in a yes/no batch, rather than everything going to the floor and following the traditional Robert's Rule of Order of things. This has been sort of developing, and COVID kind of made it more immediate. It's been developing because there has been a recognition that in the Episcopal Church, we have an excessively big legislative body. As I understand, the Episcopal Church, based off of the percentages of people showing up, right, the numbers of people showing up, we are one of the largest legislative bodies. General Convention is one of the largest legislative bodies in the world. I believe I'm correct in saying that we have between the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies, a larger group of representative figures debating and discussing rules than does the country of India. That Indian parliament is not as big as the General Convention. We're talking about a church that's just shy of, a little bit under 2 million members, having a legislative body bigger than what is set to be the largest, the most populous country on earth. Okay. So there is definitely a desire and recognition among the church to say, look, we've got to, this makes no sense. We've got to shrink this bloat. We've got to narrow this stuff down. Furthermore, there's an economic reality to this. It is unnecessarily expensive, right, to rent a convention center for 3 weeks and to house people for 3 weeks. And then to expect dioceses to house people for 3 weeks, right? So we shrunk it down to 2 weeks. And then because of COVID, it got even further down to 1 week because a lot of stuff could be done online. And so, again, there has been this recognition in the church that we've got to shrink this thing. At the same time, there is the realization that some things do need to be discussed, and that the real valuable work of General Convention is in-person, face-to-face interaction and debate and discussion. I had the blessed opportunity to go to General Convention, was it 79? It was in Austin, Texas in 2018. And I just went. I was not a delegate. I was not there for any official capacity. I just thought I needed to go. I'd never seen it. And so I went for the last 3 days of that General Convention. And it was really remarkable because I got to see firsthand the beauty of the Episcopal Church, where people on really, really opposite sides of issues could talk in the room and could pray together and to faithfully come to some form of consensus. That's the beauty of our church, is that we can actually do that kind of stuff. And it happens when we're in the room together. When we take that away, we lose something. And so the proposed change of the rules of orders to move rules of order, to move more things to the consent calendar, to shorten floor debate, to do all those things. Yes, they streamline the process and they help us do all of this work in a way that saves time and money, but it also loses a key element of what we need to function as the kind of church that we are. And so, there's been no discussion to find ways to shrink the number of delegates or anything like that. And again, I'm just spitballing here. I'm not saying that that's what we necessarily need to do, but we are. It seems that we're trimming in the areas that are not helpful while not addressing the things that really probably need to be addressed, right? And so that's part of the discussion around all of that. And these three big things that I've highlighted today lead me now to this more rhetorical sense of what are we doing? What are we doing as the Episcopal Church? Because again, 240 something resolutions, many of them, if I can be completely blunt, are performative. And what I mean by that is they are there to make statements about various issues and causes, and that they might not really have rooted work in the life of the church. And I know there's some people who are very passionate and they're going to wonder, what am I talking about? Your thing, your ballywick, the thing you care about? I don't know. But what I'm saying is that when we look at these resolutions, look at Scott Gunn's blog, and you'll see that there are a lot of things there that really, are things that the church is kind of already committed to doing. There is for instance, one of the things Scott points out is that there is a resolution to put together a committee, a standing commission on creation care and environmental racism, I think is what it's called. And the question that comes up is that, do we need a committee to do that? Or is this something that just we as Episcopalians need to commit ourselves to doing, right? Can dioceses do a better job, right? This is an expensive concept. Is this something that we need to spend money on to make this happen? Or is this something that by virtue of our baptismal covenant, we already ought to be doing, right? These are the kinds of things. And these are the kinds of questions that we need to really be looking at as the church. Furthermore, when we look at all of these resolutions, we look at all of this legislative work, and then we confront the fact that we are a church that is pretty rapidly diminishing in numbers in terms of our worship attendance and things like that, it becomes a very sobering thing. Is how much of this legislative work is really the most important thing for us, right? What's been fascinating for me to watch is how, given the real start of this prep work for the General Convention in the past year, how quickly the church has been confronted with its reality, particularly in the House of Bishops. Clergy shortages, just the sheer number of parishes that just do not have clergy, whether the number of parishes we have is too much. I mean, just all of these different things that we're being confronted with. And ultimately, and you'll see this with Scott's writing, and I think if you talk to the bishops and listen to the bishops, you hear it too, which is this real clear recognition that what we in the Episcopal Church actually need is discipleship. Discipleship. Resolutions aren't going to make disciples, right? They reflect our desire of the kinds of disciples we want to make, yes. But you can't legislate discipleship. That is something that can only come from the indwelling power of the Holy Spirit and from us as the church better knowing Jesus and us praying and committing ourselves to that work. As I said already, Michael Curry was a phenomenal figure in our church for getting us in the Episcopal Church to remember, how important it is to talk about Jesus. We went for a long time not talking about Jesus nearly as much as we probably should have been. We had pockets of the church here and there that did it, but as a denomination itself, we had been, if I can be blunt, kind of embarrassed about Jesus. We were very comfortable with being a social justice church, with being all of that kind of was it like non-government organization, NGO type stuff, right? But Bishop Curry reminded us that first and foremost, we are worshipers of Jesus, and that we have to talk about Jesus, and we have to proclaim Jesus, and acknowledging that as Episcopalians, we do have kind of our, Jesus is the faith in Jesus is lived out in a unique way in our church, and that's true of all churches. And so that's something we've gotten very comfortable with, or we've gotten a little more comfortable with. But now we've got to go more than just proclaiming Jesus, but now what does it mean to actually follow him? And this realization is compounded by the fact that the more conservative parts of our church were the ones who were more articulate about this, and they're not here anymore. And we've not really lamented that. And I think that's something that we have to acknowledge. That could be its own discussion by itself. But we have to start talking about discipleship and following after Jesus, and following after Jesus in a way that's not simply, that doesn't morph into partisan politics, but that is following Jesus for Jesus' sake. So that's where I'm going to get a little personal. Because I said this 2 weeks ago a bit, and I'm going to say it again. I truly believe the Episcopal Church is necessary. I get frustrated with it. There are times where sometimes it makes me angry. There are times where I just kind of want to pound my head against the wall when I see the things that we do. But that is true of any loving relationship. My kids do the same thing to me. My family members do the same. My extended family members, right? They all do the same thing, and we're all kind of in the same way, right? When you love something, you have very passionate feelings about it. And I love the Episcopal Church, and I think it is necessary. I think it is necessary for us to have a church that is committed to being a traditional, Catholic, ritualistic church, but that is also open to embracing new things happening, that's open to the possibility that maybe the Lord is doing new things, and that we incorporate those new things into that tradition rather than abandoning that tradition. When we do it well, this is what we are. When I was in seminary, I was very, very taken by the Anglo-Catholic wing of the church. And I still kind of consider myself among the Anglo-Catholics. I'm probably not a very good one, but that's where I lean. But I've been in Anglo-Catholic parishes that seem to be much more interested in liturgy and ritual, in the pomp and circumstance, in looking like medieval Tridentine Catholicism, but in the English language rather than Latin, that they seem to be more committed to that than to what it means to be the Episcopal Church. By that same token, I've been around what we call low church Episcopalians that seem to be much more interested in being like evangelical type, extremely casual laser light shows, rock band kind of feel churches, and not so much embracing what it means to be Episcopalian or Anglican for that matter. Anglicanism to me, and the Episcopal Church in particular, is to me this middle way that carves its way through all, or that kind of moves its way through all of these other factors of the church, but doesn't push them out of the way or get selective with them. Rather, it holds the threads of all of these, and it holds them in a tension. But that tension is the tension of like a guitar string, right? It's of a tension that allows it to make, that holds it into tune and makes harmonious, beautiful music for the Lord. That's when we do it well. Again, that we don't abandon the tradition and we don't ignore the new things that are happening, but we find a way to incorporate them together. I've shared this story before, so I'll share it again, but it's a General Convention story. In 2018, when I went to Austin, I got to my hotel room, threw my stuff in my hotel room, threw on my cassock, and then, which is the black robe, in case you don't know, and then went over to the convention center. And it was late afternoon. It was the end of the legislative day. It was the end of the day for convention. And so I was wandering the halls trying to find out where to go. Bumped into this lady who asked me if, she's like, "Oh, you look the part. Would you like to help hand out communion?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so I was drafted to be a Eucharistic minister for the daily Eucharist at General Convention. And at that service, which was, again, they managed to really effectively convert a convention center room into a worship space. It was beautiful. But I'll never forget when it came time for the gospel reading. And the gospel procession took place. And behind the processional cross was this deacon. And she, right there, something different, right? She, holding the gilded gospel book, gold, brass, bronze, polished, shiny cover. She was wearing a dalmatic. Now, I don't expect many of you to know what a dalmatic is, but a dalmatic is a very ancient vestment. It's actually my favorite vestment in the Episcopal Church, or in all of Christianity. But it's a deacon's vestment. It's sort of the deacon's equivalent of the chasuble. Not extremely common vestment in the church. So it was cool to see that at the General Convention. But here was this woman, this young woman, carrying a gospel book, dressed in a dalmatic, very medieval looking vestment. She had a mohawk. She had visible tattoos and piercings, like gauges and stuff, I recall. Now, I don't know if this is my projection or if I somehow actually knew this. So if it's an assumption, I apologize to this person. And again, I'm assuming she was the pronouns. But I understood this person to be, to also be lesbian, or at least a member of the LGBTQ community in some way. And so here I am sitting in this worship space, and I'm seeing this thoroughly contemporary person who checks so many of the boxes of so-called woke identity, if we want to go down that term, but was also presenting something deeply ancient, dressed in ancient vestments, reading ancient words out of an ancient book. And it all came together in this one moment, in this sort of completed package. And to me, I thought, that's the Episcopal Church. That's the beauty of this church. It's not abandoning things for this, it's trying to hold it together. I happened to, while I was at that General Convention, I happened to sit in at the House of Bishops meeting for the last the last meeting of the last piece of legislation related to the full acceptance of same-sex marriage in the church. I was there for the House of Bishops vote, and then I was there when they read the vote in the House of Deputies later that day. Now, this was a topic that had consumed my life since easily the year 2000. As many of you know, I grew up in a fairly homophobic environment, and so that this topic was big. And then I came into the Episcopal Church after Gene Robinson, and so that was, this is when all these splits, all this stuff happened, so much arguing, all of it, and then a lot of transformation in me personally around this topic. And so I got to be there for the last vote when the gavel was dropped on this subject that had caused so much heartache and prayer and everything in the church. And that was a powerful thing for me to see. Not everybody agreed with how things went, but a compromise resolution passed and it was settled. It was settled. Same-sex marriage was permissible in the entire Episcopal Church. And it was just gavel dropped, next order of business. It was amazing. It was amazing how little fanfare it garnered. As a result of that, though, I have seen so many stories, largely online, and I've encountered in person a few of these stories, of people who identify as some form, somewhere on the LGBTQ spectrum, queer person of some kind, who to them religion was a hateful thing, Christianity in particular was a hateful thing, something they wanted nothing to do with, but then somehow they encountered the Episcopal Church and in its ancient practices, but its willingness to embrace and accept them as they are, they come to faith in Jesus. And they articulate a faith in Jesus that sounds an awful lot like the kind of faith in Jesus I was taught as a Baptist. And so for me, the Episcopal Church is a necessary thing, if for no other reason than stories like that. It's a powerful witness for us, and I think it's one of the great gifts of our church. So yes, our numbers are diminishing. We are entering into a new age. But to me, these are the things that we ought to focus on. This is where the real work of the church is taking place and where we see it at our best. Not in resolutions galore, but when we live faithfully the church that we've inherited and the way of being that church that we have inherited. That's where, to me, it's really just beautiful, And to that end, we're doing God's work, I think. Anyone who goes to General Convention will tell you that the really beautiful, the two places where some of the best experiences people have are found sometimes in the worship services, yes, but in the exhibit hall. The exhibit hall is where like all the seminaries and all the publications and all the companies and all of that get together and they share their wares and meet and greet and talk. And in that regard, it looks a lot more like a comic convention or sci-fi convention or business convention or something like that. Somewhere along the way, years ago, I heard someone say, shouldn't we spend more attention on the exhibit hall and the worship life of the church and less on the legislative piece? And I think there's wisdom in that. I'm not sure how we do that. If we move away from being, less federal and more diocesan, I don't know. But what I do know is we offer a beautiful gift to the world, and we are necessary because we are doing something that no other church is doing. We are giving the ancient Christian faith to people who otherwise would not get it. And that to me is invaluable and irreplaceable and something for us to really, really rejoice in and to put forward. So yeah, what are we doing? Hopefully what we're doing is listening to the Spirit and living faithfully into what we are called to do as this church. We have 2 weeks more or less about. It's the 23rd. June 23rd is when General Convention starts. It will definitely be something interesting to see. I have a feeling that something truly holy will happen. And that this will mark an important change for the Episcopal Church. So I hope we're being faithful. I mean, I know the delegates from this diocese are faithful people doing the work that they believe the Lord is calling them to do. And so I trust that other delegates are doing that same work. And that when we get into the space together, the Lord is in our midst and that we do what we're called to do. So I hope that's why I trust that's what we're doing. I trust that's what we're doing. So it's been an hour. I'll end. Next week, I'm not exactly sure what I'll talk about. It'll probably be something General Convention related. So just hold this space. I don't know yet. Just be honest with you. Otherwise, have a good rest of the week. If you join us on Sunday, if you can, we'd love to have you. It is, if you can join us online and join us in person, that'd be great. If you're catching this and watching this and you're not part of a church community and you happen to be here in Hawaii, we would love to have you. If you're not here in Hawaii, but you're near another Episcopal church, go visit. They would love to have you. So yes, hopefully we will somehow see you on Sunday or what have you. Have a good rest of the week. God bless you all. E malama pono, take good care. Uhui ho, and aloha oi. See you when I see you. All right. I don't want to keep us too long. So have a good rest of the night. God bless you all. Good night.